You just give me a little wink and I'll keep
I
pressing.
can see it.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Yes. So as Nick said, I'm at the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're a nonprofit organization fighting to eliminate student debt. Uh, Onwards. So yeah, just a little rundown of the student debt crisis. I'm sure many of you are familiar. It is indeed a crisis. 45 million Americans holding this burden of $1.8 trillion. Simply because higher education is unaffordable in our country. Most of those loans are federal student loans, so held by the Education Department. And that is 43 million borrowers have federal student loans. Many of those borrowers, however, also have private student loans, which we'll get into a little bit. But right now, what we're able to focus on is it's easier, unfortunately, to protect borrowers and to implement policies for federal student loan borrowers. And just a little bit about this crisis, as with many other issues facing facing our country, it is indeed a racial justice issue. Black and brown borrowers are disproportionately impacted by student debt because of systemic racism, things like generational wealth, like racist banking policies, redlining, just the racial wage gap. A number of factors contribute to the reality, which is that Black borrowers in particular are more likely to need to borrow more loans, take longer to pay off, and fall into default and have higher balances. So when we're looking at this crisis, we really do need to see it as the racial justice issue that it is, and any solutions, any policy making to address a student debt crisis, should have that front and center. So yeah, next slide. Okay, so as I'm sure, again, many people are aware, this crisis is just getting worse. Whereas, you look back a couple of decades ago, older and whiter generations would probably say, oh, I paid off my student debt by working a summer job, or not, they didn't have student debt, they paid their tuition by working a summer job, and that was that. And it was easy for them because college cost $50 a semester back then. And what happened was, over the decades, state governments in particular chose to disinvest in higher education, funding public higher education less and less. So colleges then saw they were getting less funding. They decided to shift that burden onto students and their families. So tuition prices skyrocketed. And in conjunction with that, we saw the cost of living continue to increase, inflation continued to increase, wages stagnated. So all of this combined means you have an incredibly expensive degree that we're being told over and over. We need a degree in order to like have a job that's going to help us climb the economic ladder, right? Or it's the American dream, it's the promise. And so now we're in a situation where balances are becoming higher and higher. So instead of just having a few $1,000s, you're more likely to have 20, 30, $40,000 and more in student debt. And of course, those with higher balances are, again, like I mentioned before, disproportionately people of color. Next slide. And so, where we're at now is that I think in the last couple of years, this issue has really luckily become, more in the public eye. It's been talked about more. In 2020, we saw for the first time that presidential candidates incorporated it in their platforms. It was talked about on the debate stage for the first time at the presidential level. And so, luckily people are talking about it, but we haven't seen a ton of policy solutions implemented yet that have alleviated the strain on borrowers. So as you can see here, the trend is bad. We say that student debt crisis is now worse than the mortgage crisis was at the peak of the mortgage crisis. You can see that student loan borrowers are falling into delinquency and default more and more, and not just because oh, I don't want to pay my student loans. It's because people are unable to afford their payments. And so these numbers you can see are from before the payment pause, that just delinquency and default are extremely high for student loan debt. and the consequences of falling into default on student loan debt are horrendous and can impact a consumer for a lifetime. It includes negative impacts on your credit. It can prevent you from being able to, get a mortgage. And beyond that, the government can also garnish your wages, garnish your social security check, garnish other social benefits that were implemented by the government in order to fight poverty. But then you see student loan borrowers who are struggling to make ends meet, fall into default, and then maybe have their earned income tax credit garnished because they just can't afford payments. So things are bad. Next slide. But we see something that did help was, and it's like obviously unfortunate because no one wants to experience a pandemic, but at the beginning of the pandemic, the federal government gave us the payment pause. So they paused payments and interest for federal student loans, which was necessary because it's an economic crisis. But we see this had obviously a fantastic impact for student loan borrowers. Having that burden removed from folks' shoulders gave necessary breathing room that wasn't just necessary because of the pandemic, but was necessary because of the pre-existing student debt crisis that people were feeling the burden. And so we see removing student loans entirely from people's monthly budgets is the only realistic solution to helping people not feel the squeeze anymore. So there are other, you might hear other policymakers talk about, we added a new income-driven repayment plan option, or so-and-so, we added this other option for borrowers. And at the end of the day, like they might be helpful, but they're not gonna really address the problem the way that we need to. And we just need to get the burden off people's shoulders. And that means reducing balances and eliminating payments, or eliminating balances altogether. Okay, so next. So again, yeah, that's just kind of some data showing, and all this information can the source of these can be found on our website as well. But yeah, just showing again that this is an issue that disproportionately impacts Black communities in particular. So I think this just shows like higher balances across, we did there was a report that's the Student Borrower Protection Center did, focusing on a few major cities. So you can see, compare balances in majority white zip codes compared to majority minority zip codes. And again, just showing that this is in fact a racial justice issue. And so when we're thinking about policy solutions, we need to take action to prevent the default that we know is coming at the end of the payment pause if payments are turned back on and no action is taken. We know we're staring down the drain of a default crisis. Next. So now we're catching up to the present. Everyone knows there was kind of quite a long campaign where folks advocated for a really long time to get President Biden to announce or to cancel student debt. And then in August, he finally did make that announcement. So that was a long time coming. It was a great victory, I think, for a lot of people who this has been, in the works. I know I have some colleagues who've been working on this issue for over a decade. So this is a long time coming. However, he made the announcement. Obviously, we still don't have that relief in our bank accounts. And so some of the other factors playing in here is that our student loan servicing system is non-functioning. We have servicers who, their call times are hours and hours. Borrowers will call with a question and they can't get a hold of someone, or records are lost for borrowers. They've made payments and those payments aren't counted. And so we have a real servicing crisis as well, where servicers are just not doing what they're meant to be doing. And so it's just also a problem caused by scale. We have 45 million student loan borrowers, and a couple of dozen a couple of dozen servicers. So really, like I said, canceling student debt will get millions of borrowers out of the system, taking some of the pressure off of servicers and making things a lot smoother for remaining borrowers. So I think next slide. And so everyone knows student debt cancellation is wildly popular across demographics, across political parties, across ages, across education experience, even among people who didn't go to college or who already paid off their student loan debt. We know that there are plenty of people in those categories who still support canceling student debt, because we know that the path forward, the talking point, which I'm sure many of you have heard, is like the path forward. As progressives, we want things to be better for the future, for the next generation. We want things to continuously be better than they were before. So if you are concerned about voters not supporting, if I don't know, I know whatever your concern may be, turn to the polls. And so we've got a number of polls on our website as well that show just basically across the board it is an overwhelmingly popular policy. And the polls also show us that borrowers are report not being confident in their ability to make payments when the payment pause ends. They don't know what they'll do. I've talked to many folks who are concerned they won't be able to make ends meet, and so this is just not something that people can fit into their monthly budgets. So we've got a looming crisis if nothing is done. And so now we get to the announcement that I mentioned that President Biden announced in August. He had a plan to cancel student debt. And this plan includes, so it's for all federal student loan borrowers. If you were a Pell Grant recipient, you will get $20,000 of cancellation. If you are not a Pell Grant recipient, you'll get up to $10,000 of cancellation. And this is all if you earn below $125,000 for an individual or $250,000 for a couple. So this is great. This was a really great announcement. Could it have been better? Yes. We advocated for, in particular, for it to be automatic. There would be no application, for no means testing, which means no income limit, just because we know these things often complicate and prevent people who need the relief the most from actually securing that relief. So, for example, there are likely going to be like complications with people who are unemployed and don't know how to prove their income, or we always know like this kind of means testing in the past has not always bode well. But something's better than nothing. This is good. And once this is implemented, it will take 20 million borrowers out of the student loan system entirely. That means 20 million people will have their balances wiped out, which is fantastic. And then obviously more people will have a significant chunk taken out of their balance. So this is very good. Yeah, and as of now, the payment pause has been extended through end of June. So payments are set to resume in July, but the Biden administration has made it clear that they're really not likely to turn payments back on before they've canceled debt. So that'll be good. And there is a new income driven repayment plan as well. So next. And I'm sure also many here have heard about the legal challenges to student debt cancellation. The most important thing to know is that I think in the first day that the application was released, several million people had already applied. And in the time that the online application was open, 26 million people had already applied. So it is needed very much. And then the education department has already processed 16 million of those applications. So as soon as the administration gets the legal green light, 60 million people will see cancellation pretty immediately reflected on their balances. So that's the good news. And then, in terms of the fight moving forward. Experts, my colleagues are very confident that, the legal authority exists, is clear, and will prevail. And so advocates are going to keep shouting from the rooftop that, student debt cancellation is legal. There is an authority. The Biden administration is not going to back down. They're going to keep fighting until they're allowed to do cancellation. And then so the Supreme Court is going to hear the case in February, and we're expecting a decision in June. So that's what's happening now. Next. But in the meantime, President Biden and his administration have been doing a really good job of canceling other debts where they can. So using other targeted programs for schools that scammed or misled or defrauded their students. They've been canceling debt for those students, for schools that closed, stuff like that. So they've already canceled $38 billion for 1.75 million student loan borrowers. So that's good. And then if you're sitting here wondering, oh, I have student loan debt, or I want to talk about this to my community, to other people, there are other paths to explore. So, I would, if you have questions, I'm going to have my email at the end, but there are other paths. And especially if anyone here works in public service, so if you work for a nonprofit or the government, I always tell everyone to, look into public service loan forgiveness. So, okay, next. And on the state level, a lot can still be done to protect borrowers and kind of advance this agenda. There are a couple of smaller things and then some bigger things. So I'll start with some work that my colleagues have been doing is ending transcript withholding, which is the practice when a college or university sees that you have some outstanding, at the time you graduate, sees that you have some outstanding institutional debt. Some have even been as ridiculous as like you have an outstanding library fee, or like an administrative fee or something. Could be even, $20 or $200 or something like that. They'll say, oh, until you pay whatever debt you owe us, we're not going to give you your transcript. So it makes it really hard for graduates to then go out and get a job to pay off their debt. So this is a really unconscionable practice. And so it's something that states can do. Yes, angry react. States can pass laws to, to prevent this practice. And then also on the state level, it's really important to pursue protections for private student loan borrowers, because like I said in the beginning, private student loan borrowers do not have hardly any of the options that federal student loan borrowers are granted. They don't have access to a lot of the same programs, options for relief or protections. Private student loan borrowers are a lot more likely to get screwed over, often face way higher interest rates, lots of garbage like that. So it's really important that states are doing what they can to rein in the predatory actors, predatory lenders, and the scammers. And so for that, I would recommend, you work with the New Jersey ombudsperson. That is always a really great resource in the states that have it. Not every state has a student loan ombuds, but that's always a really helpful office to work with for protections for borrowers. And I also dropped a link to where you can submit complaints about these predatory actors. So that's something that's definitely important to do on the state level. And then, in that same vein, general consumer protections. So just making sure that state law has the appropriate regulations for, like for-profit colleges and universities, for lenders, for servicers, for boot camps in particular are becoming increasingly popular. So you'll see like tech or coding, like they'll advertise themselves as like a couple weeks program, you get a certificate, you pay us, way cheaper than you would pay college tuition, and we'll teach you the skills, and we'll deliver you to someone in the field, basically. But it's very scammy. Far too often people don't get, what they were promised, and then they're still left holding the bill. So it's important to regulate those. And then they also often will have what's called an income share agreement, which is basically a student loan in different different packaging, just different dressing. So still something to be aware of, and on the state level to regulate. And then of course, free college. We just saw some months ago, I think New Mexico is the latest state to pass tuition-free community college. So there are a couple of states that have done this now, and it's possible. So that's always important, and that will prevent student debt, of course. Next. And if anyone's looking for like state-specific resources, our website has a whole lot specifically on, on New Jersey. And so I will just leave the link there. And then I think that's all I got. Is that next? Yep. And there's my email if anyone wants to email me, and I will take questions if anyone has questions.
Outstanding, Ella. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So much.
No problem.
For your expertise and your time. John, I see you unmuted. Do you have a question for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ella, for the presentation. I was wondering, I heard that the Biden's administration's justification for the student loan program, I think he was using COVID as a justification. I heard that wasn't as a strong legal standing as I forgot what the act was. I think it was the Education Fairness Act or something like that.
Okay, so yeah, so there are a couple of like ways that the Biden administration could legally justify debt cancellation. And the one like that you correctly pointed out is, rooted in COVID. That's based on the HEROES Act, which is there are like the Department of Justice has come out with like legal memoranda, pointing like combing through and pointing out where the legal authority within that lies, and especially because we're still technically in the emergency health crisis. Like, it is totally valid, and even so, like, we know that economic fallout from like pandemics or health crises like often last years after what is determined to be the end of that crisis. So I think it's totally valid. I think that is a very strong place to root you're the legal authority for this. But even if he doesn't root it in that, moving forward, they could go with something called settlement and compromise, where one of the lawsuits, the complainants were saying that, there's normally like a procedure that the administration and the education department has authority to do is to do a standard rulemaking process where they say, hey, everyone, we want to make a rule doing XYZ. We're going to publish it. We give you a period of, I think it's like 30 days or something like that to publicly, like, the public can comment on this. We will review all the comments, and then we will, make the rule, whether it's like with adjustments based on the comments or not. And we're going to implement that rule. And they have the authority to do that. That just exists like year round, all the time, whether we're in a pandemic or not. And so that is kind of like what I would think would be their plan B. But they've said they're going to use every legal tool in their tool belt, and there are quite a lot of tools in the tool belt. So I would say like we can just like continue to support them on doing what they have to do. But even if it's not rooted in the pandemic, like, there are still a lot of ways they can do this. So sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Was that did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Anybody else have a question? Or John, if there's another question? Otherwise, I'll jump in. I was very curious, with I think it's like 20 states or something like that with free community college. I imagine they had some projections and numbers that bore that out, that kind of decision-making process, and what were those indicators that they were looking at that made them ultimately make that decision?
Yeah, so I didn't follow that as closely as I would have liked to on the state level, just because mostly my work the last few years has been like on like federal level stuff. But I know that, having talked to was it last year or the previous year during like reconciliation, we were talking to some, like we were trying to encourage them to include free community college in the reconciliation bill, so and Build Back Better, which almost happened and then it got dropped. But at that point we were talking to some I think like senators staffers, and they were saying that like they couldn't support it on the federal level if their state legislatures would not support it and would not also pass it, because they like for some reason they need to be like bought in, they need to get approval on the state level, because I think it has something to do with like the funding mechanism. It's like in order to benefit from, if it was to be implemented federally, in order to benefit from it, a state needs to kick in some funding or something like that. I don't remember. But anyway, plenty of states do, like it is doable in plenty of states. It's just, you have to know your legislatures, like the assembly and the state senate, and then if the governor would sign off on it. So I don't know. I'm not terribly familiar with like New Jersey legislatures, but I mean, I know that there are some pretty awesome things implemented in New Jersey, like protections for borrowers. So I don't know. I'm happy to look into it and like see what what those numbers looked like for the states who passed it. But I know it was kind of a long road, I remember, for those who fought for it in New Mexico. So
Well, I'm sure you've piqued enough interest here for us to go and look it up right after this. Brad, I see you have your hand up.
Ella, thank you so much. Here's my question for you. I'm just going back and forth in my head about the negotiations that must have taken place with regards to forgiving student debt, and the idea that people have to register. They have to like submit in order to have their debt reviewed. And to me, it seems like the framework is this false belief that there's all these freeloaders and we don't want to give people for nothing, etc. But from an actual like business perspective, if someone is not inclined to submit a request form, then I would think any financial institution would put them under a bad debt type of write-off rating. Like that's not the person you're going to collect on anyway, right? And so it seems to me like we screw ourselves at the federal level with the denominator by holding on to bad debt too long. And I'm just curious if that was ever something that was discussed, if there was a pushback, or if that was an area where it was just rolled over and it was like, let's argue the next point and try to secure it for people who have an income threshold or whatever.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You make a fantastic point. I mean, that's why we pushed for, partially why we pushed for no application for it to be automatically done. And many advocates tried for a really long time to convince the administration. But ultimately, I think this was their kind of like way to, like you hit the nail on the head. They didn't want to look like they were giving a handout to like the rich people or who like, wealthy students which it's a totally stupid argument, because like rich people don't take out student loans. And we saw like there was a really great study that came out from like Senator Elizabeth Warren and an economist, Charlie Eaton, pointing out that 97% of people with student debt already fall below the income requirements anyway. So like again, it's like rich people don't have student debt. It really should have been automatic. And to the point about the like people who have just like debt they're not going to act on and fall into default, and it being like bad, what you would say, bad debt. That's something we've also been advocating for to the education department for a long time, and like we are already seeing that people who haven't applied are disproportionately borrowers in default. And so what this means is there's going to need to be a targeted, like if things don't change when applications reopen, which like it just requires more outreach, and like the education department simply doesn't have like contact information for borrowers. Like they just don't have the tools to reach the people who need to be reached. So there's got to be something done, but also we've advocated for them to just wipe out old debt, like just cancel debt that's older than X years old, which I don't remember if we've said like 10 years or something like that. But I think there are some institutions, and I think it's like depends on what bank or lender, but like they will, because like you're right, it costs them more ultimately at some point. But they'll like write off, or is it a state thing? But like some entity has this rule where like if it's older than 7 years old, they can just wipe it out. So I don't know why they can't do that at the federal level. They should, but yeah.
All right, Jeremy, under the wire. I think she's got a minute left before we get
7 years for credit report, 6 years in the state of New Jersey on a contract, 16 years on a lease. We got to know our information.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of what you said. Could you say it again?
Got to come off your credit report. Bad debt has to come off your credit report after 7 years. Statute of limitations on contract, that would be a bad debt in New Jersey, is 6 years. If it's on a lease, it's 16 years.
Thanks, Jeremy.
All right. John, did you have another question? I thought you might have had one before.
Oh, sure. I was wondering about I know this wasn't your area, but the free community college. I know that, I guess that would have to be passed by the state legislature. And just a quick comment, I know like in Middlesex, the teachers haven't had a contract for about 3 years, and there's a big fight, and tuition has gone up as well during that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a tough and long road, which I'm sure New Mexico can attest to.
Yeah.
With that, thank you very much, Ella, for bestowing all of this wisdom and knowledge upon us. Soaked it in like a sponge. We can jump back into the main room now, where I think we're going to give everyone a little 10-minute break anyway, before we hit into our awards and our keynote. I'll see you all there.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you, Ella.